Hi everybody, I just want to go over a few things with you. Oops, sorry about that. Now you get to see my book. So the first thing I want to show you is this incisal third, middle third, cervical third. It's important to know where these imaginary lines are. Again, all you're doing is just dividing things into thirds. So it's imaginary lines. And then it's important to know these just because that's where our contact points are. So here's a maxillary central incisor. They're both in the incisal third. This one is a little closer to the incisal edge. That's the mesial. And then the distal is a little higher up, but not so high that it enters that middle third. Okay. Now, let's see here. Go back to here. There we go. Yay, you get to see me because you don't see enough of me, right? All right, so let's review calcification. The calcification starts with the mandibular central and the maxillary central. These both calcify at 3 months. The next calcification is the mandibular lateral, which is at 4 months. And then the maxillary lateral comes much later, which is at about a year. Eruption. We have our central on the mandibular first, and that's at 6 to 7 years. Again, root completion is 2 years after that, so about 9 years. And then we have 7 to 8 years for our maxillary central incisor. Root completion at 10 years. Our mandibular lateral then is about the same time as the maxillary central. They're usually coming in right around the same time. Same root formation, also at 10 years. And then we have our very well developed maxillary lateral, and this, I should put it this way, and this comes in just a little bit later. We can look at 8 to 9 years for that, with root completion at about 11 years. So the maxillary central, again, is wider mesiodistally than it is labiolingually. Wider this way than it is this way. Okay. Its crown to root ratio is about 1 to 1. The CEJ on the facial tips just slightly to the distal there. Just ever so slightly. The root is conical shaped with a blunted end. This tooth has imbrication lines, which are these little ridges here at the cervical third. It is more narrow on the lingual than it is on the facial, resulting in a triangular shape on the proximal surfaces. So here you can see the mesial wide up here coming to a point. That's our triangle. And same with the root. It's wide on the facial surface, and then it comes to a point on the lingual. So wide and to a point. Hopefully you can kind of see that. Hard to see. I suggest watching this video when you're at school and you can actually touch and hold these and everything. We have a cingulum. That's this little bulge here on the lingual, and then we have the let's see here, this would be the distal marginal ridge, the mesial marginal ridge. We know this is the mesial because this is at 90 degrees, this point right here, and this is more rounded, so this is the distal, our cingulum, and then our incisal marginal ridge. And what those do is they cause kind of that shovel look where we have this, the part where the snow would go in the shovel or the dirt would go. Of course, we live in Minnesota, so I think snow with shovels. That's a fossa. That's called the fossa, F-O-S-S-A. And sometimes that cingulum can kind of extend there. Okay. So conical shape, blunted, triangle. Again, the curvature of the CEJ is greater, meaning it's dipping towards the incisal edge further than it is on the distal. So, mesial, distal. Okay. Next we have our maxillary lateral. And unlike the central, which is about a 1-to-1 ratio crown to root, the root's usually just a little bit longer, but not too much, 2 to 3 millimeters. This, the roots are the same length, but the crowns are a little bit shorter. Remember, the lateral has the most variation of all teeth except for third molars. It can also be congenitally missing. So this tooth can look like a cuspid or it can look like a central. Generally, they look like central incisors. So the anomalies with this one is that it could be a pegged lateral or it could be congenitally missing. The anomalies with this tooth is that you can have a short root or you could have a long crown. Also gemination, which is the twinning of the crown, but sharing a root. So you'd have 2 crowns, 1 root. The contact areas for the lateral are going to be more towards the middle thirds. Okay. But the identifying characteristics for this, the way you can definitely tell it's a lateral is one, it's maxillary lateral, it's much smaller. But again, these marginal ridges, the edges of the scoop, of the shovel, are all very prominent. And then the cingulum here, okay? And sometimes the cingulum can have a lingual groove or a lingual pit that is prone to decay, so it's something we would want to seal. But that groove can sometimes extend onto the root, and that is a concern because it will cause a pocket there, because that'll harbor bacteria in there. So again, longer root. Other than that, all other features of this tooth are smaller than the central, but the root is the same. Root is the same length as the maxillary centrals. Okay, I think we got most of the highlights there. Make sure you review your PowerPoint. I'm just kind of going through some things that were muddy for some people. Now we're going to move on to the mandibular. And one thing about these teeth, one way you can tell it's a mandibular is that they have these deep concavities here. Okay, deep concavities on the root surfaces. And on these teeth, they are, let's see here, mainly on the distal it seems. But they can be on either side. Okay, so as you can see, they're much smaller than the maxillary teeth. The, let's see here. The roots aren't so conical, they're just almost straight down. The mandibular central is just kind of a plain tooth. It doesn't have a whole lot of features to make you go, oh, okay, that's definitely a blah, blah, blah. But if you feel that fossa area, or the, I don't want to call it a fossa, but the lingual surface, it's very smooth. There's really not a lot of anatomy there. As compared to the lateral, you're going to feel more of the developmental area here on the lingual. There's a bump right there. Okay. This lateral also has a greater cingulum, but that's hard to tell when you don't have them side by side. So the one thing that you can really tell the difference between the two separately is that this, the lateral, kind of twists and comes down here, where this is almost symmetrical. The central, if you were to split it in half here, it's almost identical with just a little bit more of a curvature here than here. So this would be the distal. If you look at this, it slopes down. Okay? This is almost straight across. Okay? Straight across, slopes down. The central on the mandibular, the central is smaller than the lateral, and on the maxillary, the central is larger than the lateral. So it's just kind of reversed. Because of that, whoops, the central on the mandibular only contacts with one other tooth, and that is the maxillary central incisor. Let me just go through my PowerPoint here so I can see if I got all that I wanted to touch on here. Let's see here. The tooth that has only one pulp horn, or maybe two, is the maxillary lateral. Don't try and figure out why teeth have the number of pulp horns they are. Usually it's how many lobes they develop from. But then there's always that exception, and in this case, it is the maxillary lateral that will only have one or two, which is a mesial and a distal. Talked about the lingual pit on the maxillary lateral, that it can often be missing. Smallest tooth in the mouth, again, is the mandibular central. The wear is on the facial incisal on the mandibular, and the lingual incisal on the maxillary. That's because that's how your teeth are coming together. The only tooth that has the incisal edge completely centered over the root is the central incisor. Otherwise, they generally tip more lingually. Okay, the last thing I want to go over with you is how to write out what teeth a number is. So let's say we're talking about the universal, tooth number 2. Okay, so first we want to do the dentition, and that equals the maxillary or mandibular. And then next you want to do okay. Next, I wanted to just go over how you identify teeth by numbers. Okay, let me just expand this a little bit. Okay, so say we're going to pretty much work in the universal system now, universal coding. So we're going to say tooth number 2. Okay. First, you need to give the dentition. So is it primary or permanent? Next, you want to give the arch, which would be the maxillary, oops, or the mandibular. Third, you want to give the quadrant. And in the universal system, we don't go by quadrant numbers. I did give credit if you had a quadrant number on it, but that won't be true from here forward. So let's go over how we would identify the quadrant on the universal system, and that would be right or left. Okay? Then you give the tooth. So this is the, so you're going to say molar or incisor, but that's not really specific enough. So this is how it would look for tooth number 2. You would put, let me see if I can get this box a little bit bigger here. Number 2, you want to do the dentition, so we're going to do permanent, maxillary, right? This is on the maxillary. And we're going to say right, second, molar. Okay, now let's try tooth number 24. And that is the permanent mandibular. And then we're looking for the quadrant. Is it going to be right or left? And this instance, it's going to be the left. And then we're going to put central incisor. So you still have to be specific to the tooth here, okay? So yes, molar, but is it the first, second, or third? Incisor, is it the central or the lateral? Okay? If you have questions, please email me. I can always make another video, or please meet me during my office hours, which are Wednesdays at noon. All right, thanks. I hope this all helped.